The rain drummed softly against the window, blurring the city lights into streaks of gold and silver. She sat there, motionless, her fingers tightening around the phone as she read the message over and over again. It was short, cold, almost emotionless. "I'm sorry. It's just not working anymore. I've met someone else." Her heart pounded, but her hands were steady. She had feared this moment for months, sensing the growing distance, the late nights, the sudden change in his tone. But even then, she had held on to hope that maybe she was just overthinking, that maybe he was just stressed, that maybe love was stronger than doubt. She was wrong. They had built so much together, or at least she thought they had. She had spent years by his side, supporting his dreams, making sacrifices so he could chase success. She was the one who stayed up late, helping him plan his next move, the one who reassured him when he doubted himself, the one who believed in him even when he had nothing. And now he had left, just like that, for someone else. She wanted to scream, cry, demand answers. But what was the point? He had made his choice, and she refused to beg for someone who had already walked away. Instead, she closed her eyes and took a deep breath. For the first time in years, she was truly alone. The next few weeks passed in a blur. She barely ate, barely slept. The weight of heartbreak was heavy, suffocating. Everywhere she looked, there were memories of him, the coffee shop where they used to sit for hours, the old hoodie he had left behind, the plans they had scribbled on the back of napkins about the future they were going to build together. But then, something changed. Maybe it was the exhaustion from crying herself to sleep every night. Maybe it was the anger bubbling beneath the surface. Maybe it was the realization that the person she had fought so hard to keep was never really hers to begin with. Whatever it was, one morning, she woke up, looked in the mirror, and saw someone she didn't recognize. A woman who had given everything to a man who had walked away without hesitation. A woman who had put someone else's dreams above her own. A woman who had forgotten her own worth. That was the day everything shifted. She wasn't going to let this be her story, the woman who was left behind, the one who was too broken to move forward. No, if he could walk away and rebuild his life, so could she. And she would. She started small. She made a list of all the things she had ever wanted to do, but never did because she was too busy helping him. She dusted off the business ideas she once had, but pushed aside because he needed her attention elsewhere. She stopped waiting for closure, stopped looking at his social media, stopped wondering why. And then she got to work. Days turned into weeks. Weeks into months. She poured every ounce of pain, every drop of anger, into something productive. She learned. She failed. She got up again. She surrounded herself with people who believed in her, who pushed her to be better. The heartbreak didn't disappear overnight, but she no longer let it control her. What started as a simple idea slowly turned into something bigger than she ever imagined. She built a brand, then a company. She didn't have millions in the bank, no investors lining up to support her. All she had was her determination, her vision, and the belief that she was capable of more. And she was right. Years later, she would sit in a glass-walled office overlooking the city, signing deals worth more than she ever thought possible. Her name would be on the cover of magazines, her story shared as an inspiration. The same people who once doubted her, who whispered behind her back when he left, now spoke her name with admiration. And as for him, one day, out of nowhere, she received a message. His name flashed across her phone screen, a name that once held so much power over her emotions. She stared at it for a moment, a strange sense of detachment washing over her. "Hey, I saw your interview. I'm really proud of you. We should catch up sometime." She smiled. Not out of spite, not out of bitterness, but because she finally understood. She had spent so much time mourning the loss of someone who was never meant to stay. And now, she was free. With a deep breath, She locked her phone and set it aside. There was no need to respond. She had already won. That message sat on her phone for days. She never responded. Not because she was angry, those emotions had faded long ago, but because she had nothing left to say. There was no satisfaction in his acknowledgement, no need for closure. She had already moved on in ways he could never understand. But that didn't mean the past had completely disappeared. Every success she achieved, every milestone she reached, there was always that lingering thought in the back of her mind. What if things had been different? Not because she wanted him back, but because she wondered if she would have ever found this version of herself had he never left. If he had stayed, if their relationship had continued, would she have ever realized just how much she was capable of? Or would she have still been stuck in the shadow of someone else's dreams, too afraid to chase her own? She thought back to the early days, before the heartbreak, before the betrayal, before she had to rebuild herself from nothing. Back when she believed love was enough to hold two people together, when she thought their bond was unbreakable. They had met in the most ordinary way. A random encounter, nothing dramatic. He had walked into her life with that effortless confidence, the kind that made people stop and pay attention. And she had fallen hard, not just for him, but for the future he painted for them. Late night talks about success, about making something of themselves, about proving to the world that they were destined for more. At the time, she believed those dreams included her, that they were a team, that every sacrifice she made, every long hour she spent supporting him, every moment she put his needs before her own, was an investment in their future. But as the years passed, the balance shifted. It started small little things she ignored at first. He would talk about his ambitions, his goals, his next steps, and she would listen, encourage, support. But when she spoke about her own ideas, her own dreams, the conversations always seemed to drift back to him. She convinced herself it was just a phase, that he cared, that one day, when he had enough success, he would turn around and lift her up the way she had done for him. That day never came. Instead, as his world expanded, hers began to shrink. She watched as he built connections, took risks, moved forward, while she stood still, waiting, always waiting, for the right time, for him to notice, for her chance. And then one day, he simply left. She never understood how love could disappear so easily, how someone who once looked at you like you were their entire world could one day wake up and decide you no longer mattered. But that's exactly what happened. One day, she was his partner, his best friend, the person he claimed he couldn't live without. And the next, she was a footnote in his story. For a long time, she blamed herself. She replayed every moment, analyzed every conversation, searching for where she went wrong. Maybe she wasn't exciting enough. Maybe she didn't push hard enough. Maybe she had let herself become too predictable, too comfortable, too safe. But none of that mattered anymore. Because what she had built, what she had become, wasn't for him. It was for her. The journey hadn't been easy. In the beginning, she had no roadmap, no clear direction. All she had was the determination to never feel that powerless again. She had spent years pouring into someone else's success. Now, it was time to invest in herself. She started small. A simple idea, nothing revolutionary, just something she was passionate about, something she believed in. At first, no one took her seriously. People dismissed her, told her she didn't have enough experience, enough connections, enough resources. But she had something more valuable than all of that. She had resilience. She failed more times than she could count. Every rejection, every setback, every moment of doubt threatened to break her. But every time she fell, she got back up. She learned, adapted, grew. The turning point came when she stopped trying to prove herself to others and started focusing on proving herself to herself. She stopped seeking validation, stopped waiting for permission, stopped caring about who believed in her and who didn't. She worked in silence, built in the shadows. While others doubted, she planned. While others hesitated, she took risks. And then, almost overnight, everything changed. Success didn't come in a single dramatic moment. It was a series of small victories, each one pushing her further, each one building on the last. The first deal. The first big break. The first time she realized she was no longer chasing success, she was success. She became a name people recognized. A force people respected. The kind of person others looked up to, just as she had once looked up to him. And then one day, there he was. She hadn't thought about him in a long time. Life had moved forward, and so had she. But seeing his name again, the message sitting in her inbox, stirred something inside her. Not love, not anger, just curiosity. Did he regret it? Did he wonder what would have happened if he had stayed? If he had believed in her the way she had once believed in him? She would never know. And she didn't need to, because for the first time in her life, she wasn't looking back. She hadn't thought about him in a long time. Life had moved forward, and so had she. But seeing his name again, the message sitting in her inbox, stirred something inside her. Not love, not anger, just curiosity. Did he regret it? Did he wonder what would have happened if he had stayed? If he had believed in her the way she had once believed in him? She would never know. And she didn't need to, because for the first time in her life, she wasn't looking back. But the past has a way of creeping in, no matter how much distance you put between yourself and the things that once broke you. Success didn't shield her from old wounds, and no matter how much she had grown, there were still pieces of her that carried the weight of that betrayal. She had built something bigger than she ever imagined, but deep down, there was always that voice, that quiet whisper that asked if she would have made it here without the heartbreak, if she should be grateful, in some twisted way, that he had left. She pushed the thought away and focused on what was in front of her, a company expanding faster than she had time to process, deals waiting to be signed, a team that relied on her leadership, investors who expected results. There was no room for distractions, no space for lingering emotions about a man who was nothing more than a memory. But then, she saw him. It wasn't planned. She wasn't seeking him out, and he certainly wasn't expecting to run into her. It was at an event, one of those high-profile gatherings, where money, power, and influence filled the room. She had been invited as a guest speaker, someone whose journey was now seen as an example of resilience and ambition. He was there for different reasons, maybe networking, maybe trying to build something of his own. Their eyes met from across the room, and for a split second, time slowed. She saw the flicker of recognition in his expression, followed by something else. Was it regret? Shock? Maybe even admiration. Whatever it was, it disappeared quickly, replaced by the same effortless confidence he had always carried. But she wasn't the same woman he had left behind. He made his way toward her, weaving through the crowd as if he had every right to approach. And when he finally stood in front of her, there was a hesitation she had never seen in him before. "You look different," he said, as if he couldn't quite place what had changed. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I am different." He chuckled, shifting his weight slightly. "I meant it when I said I was proud of you. What you've built, it's incredible." There was a time when those words would have meant everything, when she would have hung on to them, searched for sincerity in his voice, wanted to believe he truly saw her now. But she didn't need his validation anymore. "Thank you," she said simply. There was an awkward pause. For the first time, it felt like he was the one searching for the right words, the one unsure of himself. "I've thought about reaching out," he admitted, his voice quieter. "But I wasn't sure if you'd want to hear from me." She tilted her head slightly, studying him. "Why now?" He hesitated. "I guess I just wanted to know if you ever thought about what could have been. There it was. The question she had once asked herself 1,000 times. The one that had kept her awake at night, that had fueled her in the moments she wanted to give up. But now, standing in front of him, the answer was clearer than ever. She let out a soft breath, almost amused. I used to, but not anymore. His jaw tightened slightly, as if he wasn't expecting that response. Maybe he thought she would say she had missed him, that she had spent years wondering if they had made a mistake. But the truth was, she hadn't. She had wondered about herself, about her own choices, her own strength, her own potential. But him? He was just a part of the past. A necessary lesson, nothing more. Before he could say anything else, someone called her name, a business partner, waiting to discuss a deal. She glanced over, giving them a small nod before turning back to him. It was good seeing you, she said, and she meant it. Not because she wanted to reconnect, but because it was the final piece of closure she never realized she needed. And just like that, she walked away. But the past wasn't finished with her yet. Because later that night, as she sat in her office overlooking the city she had once dreamed of conquering, a new message appeared on her phone. Not from him, but from someone else. A name she hadn't seen in years. A name that sent a chill down her spine. And as she opened the message, she realized that the past she thought she had buried was about to resurface in ways she never could have predicted. She stared at the message on her phone, her pulse quickening. The name on the screen sent a familiar unease through her body, a feeling she hadn't experienced in years. It was someone she had long forced out of her mind, someone who had once been part of her world, but had vanished just as quickly as he had entered. For a moment, she considered ignoring it. She had built an entire life on moving forward, on never looking back. But curiosity had a way of creeping in, and before she could stop herself, she tapped the screen, opening the message. We need to talk. It's important. No explanation. No details. Just those 4 words. She exhaled slowly, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. 100 possibilities raced through her mind. Why now? What did he want? And why, after all these years, did he still have the power to make her hesitate? She typed back, keeping it short. About what? The response came almost instantly. It's about him. Her stomach twisted. She knew exactly who he meant. She locked her phone and leaned back in her chair, staring at the city lights outside her window. She had spent so long untangling herself from the past, creating something of her own. And yet, here it was, pulling her back in. She told herself she didn't have to respond. She could let it go, pretend she never saw the message, keep moving forward like she always had. But deep down, she knew she wouldn't. Because unfinished stories always had a way of finding their way back to you. The next morning, she met him at a quiet cafe on the edge of the city. It was strange seeing him again, sitting across from her like no time had passed. But time had passed, and they were no longer the people they used to be. He looked older, more tired. There was a tension in his jaw, a weight in his eyes. She didn't waste time with small talk. What's this about? He hesitated, as if choosing his words carefully. It's about him, he repeated. I thought you should know things aren't what they seem. She folded her arms. You're going to have to be more specific. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. You've built something incredible. Everyone sees it. But so does he. And he's not happy about it. She felt a flicker of something she couldn't quite place. Why would that matter to him? He made his choice. I made mine. He leaned in slightly. That's just it. He didn't think you'd succeed. He didn't think you'd become this. And now, he's trying to rewrite the past. A slow, uneasy feeling settled in her chest. What does that mean? He pulled out his phone and slid it across the table. See for yourself. She hesitated before picking it up, scanning the screen. And as she read, Her breath caught in her throat. It was an article. An interview. His words, his version of the story. And in it, he painted himself as the reason for her success. He didn't say it outright, but the implication was clear: how he had been the one to inspire her, how his departure had motivated her, how in some way he had shaped the path she was on. Like her success was somehow tied to him. Like she owed it to him. The audacity of it made her grip the phone tighter. "He's trying to insert himself into your story," the man across from her said. "Trying to make sure people remember his name alongside yours. Like he was the mastermind behind all of this." She felt a slow, simmering anger build inside her. Not because of the article itself. She knew the truth, and so did the people who mattered. But because this was exactly the kind of thing he would do. He'd always needed to be at the center of everything. He had always needed to feel important. And now that she had built something far beyond what he ever imagined, he couldn't stand being left behind. She set the phone down carefully, exhaling through her nose. "Why are you telling me this?" He shrugged. "Because I figured you'd want to know before he takes it further. And trust me, he will take it further." She studied him, searching for an agenda. "And what do you get out of this?" He held her gaze. "Nothing. I just know what it's like to have someone take credit for things they don't deserve." She considered that for a moment, before nodding. "Thanks for letting me know." She stood up, ready to leave, but he spoke again. "Be careful," he warned. "People like him, they don't like being forgotten." She didn't respond. She didn't need to. Because now, she wasn't just going to prove him wrong. She was going to make sure he never had the power to rewrite her story again. She walked out of the cafe, the weight of the conversation settling deep in her chest. The cold air hit her skin, but she barely noticed. Her mind was racing. She had spent years proving that she was more than the girl he had left behind. That her success belonged to her and no one else. But now, here he was, trying to insert himself into a story that had nothing to do with him anymore. It wasn't just frustrating, it was infuriating. As she got into her car, she pulled out her phone and scrolled through the article again, dissecting every carefully crafted word. He had been careful, strategic. He didn't outright claim her success as his own, but the subtle suggestions were there. The way he talked about their past, the way he positioned himself as the one who had set her on this path. And the worst part? People were eating it up. The comments, the reactions, it was working. Some people sympathized with him, calling him the one who had loved and lost. Others painted her as the one who had used heartbreak as a stepping stone. And then there were the ones who wondered if maybe, just maybe, he had played a bigger role in her success than she had ever admitted. She clenched her jaw, locking her phone and tossing it onto the passenger seat. She refused to let him manipulate the narrative. But before she could figure out her next move, her phone buzzed again. Another message. But this time, it wasn't from him. It was from someone she hadn't expected. Someone who shouldn't have been reaching out. And the moment she saw the name, her stomach dropped. "Call me. Urgent." She hesitated for only a second before dialing. The call connected almost instantly. "I was hoping you'd call," the voice on the other end said. Calm. Controlled. She gripped the steering wheel, her pulse steady but alert. "What do you want?" A pause. "Then I think we both know this isn't just about him anymore." Her fingers tightened. "What are you talking about?" "You built something powerful," the voice continued. "And power comes with enemies. Some more obvious than others." She exhaled slowly. "If you have something to say, just say it." A quiet chuckle. "I just thought you should know there are people watching. And they're waiting for you to make the wrong move." A chill ran down her spine, but she refused to show it. "Who?" A beat of silence. "Then you'll find out soon enough." The call ended. She sat there for a long moment, staring at the dark screen of her phone. This wasn't just about him anymore. Something bigger was coming. and she needed to be ready. She sat in her car, gripping the steering wheel, as the last words from the call echoed in her mind. There are people watching, and they're waiting for you to make the wrong move. For years, she had built herself from the ground up, surviving betrayals, failures, and heartbreak. She had faced challenges before, but something about this moment felt different. This wasn't just about rewriting the past anymore. This was about control. Someone wanted to shape her future, and she wasn't about to let that happen. She needed answers. Instead of going home, she drove straight to her office, the city lights flashing past her as she pieced everything together in her head. The article, the message, the warning. Someone was pulling strings behind the scenes. And if she didn't act fast, she'd lose the power she had fought so hard to gain. By the time she reached her building, she had a plan. She wasn't going to wait for them to make the next move, she was going to force them to reveal themselves. She stepped into her office, the space dark except for the faint glow of the city skyline through the floor-to-ceiling windows. She pulled up the article again, reading between the lines. Every sentence was calculated, every word designed to plant doubt in people's minds. But it wasn't just about public perception, there was something deeper, something hidden. She picked up her phone and made a call. "I need you to dig into something for me," she said the moment the person answered. "Find out who's really behind this." The response was immediate. "I already have a name." Her breath caught. "Who?" There was a pause, then a name she hadn't expected. Not him. Not the journalist. Someone much closer. Someone she had trusted. She felt the floor shift beneath her, a wave of disbelief washing over her. It didn't make sense. Or maybe it did, and she had just refused to see it. She hung up without another word, her mind racing. It wasn't just about discrediting her. This was a power play. And the person she had trusted most had been working against her from the inside. A sharp knock at her office door made her snap back to reality. She turned, heart pounding, as the door slowly creaked open. And there they were, standing in the doorway, calm, composed, as if they hadn't just betrayed her. She met their gaze, refusing to show even a flicker of emotion. "I know," she said, her voice steady. A small, knowing smile. "I was wondering when you'd figure it out." The final piece of the puzzle slid into place. This wasn't just a rivalry. It was a game. And it had only just begun. She stood there, staring at the person she had once trusted, the weight of betrayal pressing against her chest. The office was silent, except for the faint hum of the city outside. But inside, everything was unraveling. "I was wondering when you'd figure it out," they said, stepping further into the room, their expression unreadable. She refused to let her emotions show. Not the shock, not the anger, not the lingering disbelief. She had worked too hard, fought too many battles, to let this moment shake her. But still, she needed answers. Why? Her voice was calm, steady. Not a whisper, not a shout, just a question. A slow, deliberate sigh. "Because you made it look easy." Her eyes narrowed. "Easy? You built something out of nothing. You made people believe in you. And in doing that, you made the rest of us feel small." The confession hung in the air between them. It wasn't about money, or power, or even revenge. It was about something far more personal: resentment. She exhaled slowly, piecing it all together. "So you tried to tear me down? To make it look like I didn't do this on my own?" "I didn't have to try very hard," they admitted. "People love a story. And you? You gave them the perfect one. The girl who rose from heartbreak, the one who built an empire from nothing." A pause. It was only a matter of time before someone questioned it. She felt a bitter smile tug at her lips. "And you made sure they did." A shrug. "I just gave them the push they needed." She should have felt furious. She should have wanted to scream. But instead, all she felt was exhaustion. For years, she had fought to prove herself, to be seen, to be respected. And now, standing face to face with someone who had tried to rewrite her story, she realized something. She didn't need to prove anything anymore. She had won. Not because of the money or the success or the headlines, but because she knew who she was. And no one, not him, not the media, not even the people she had once trusted, could take that away from her. She straightened her shoulders. "I don't have time for this." A flicker of surprise crossed their face. "What? You heard me." She grabbed her bag, walking toward the door. "You wanted me to react. You wanted me to fight. But I have better things to do." For the first time, they looked uncertain. "You can't just walk away from this." She stopped, turning back slightly. "Watch me." And with that, she left.